Hello, high schoolers. This is Skill Builder 15, and today we're going to be looking at something called the Circle of Fifths. This is a tool that you probably have seen before, but hopefully by the end of the lesson, you'll have a better understanding of why it's important and how it can be helpful to you as a musician. And this will finish up our short unit where we've been talking about key signatures and major scales. And then next week, we'll move on to actually practicing some major scales on your instruments because many of you are preparing NISMA solos, and in May we'll have to be able to play some major scales. So that's the game plan starting next week. But let's jump into the circle of fifths today. Go ahead and start by putting your name at the top of your paper. And the big thing that I want you to remember today as we're going through this is that with the circle of fifths, we are organizing information that we already know. We're taking things that we've learned in the previous lessons and putting them together into a tool that can be helpful to us. And the thing that I like to compare the circle of fifths to is the periodic table of elements. Most of you should be familiar with the periodic table from a class that you've taken in the past. Maybe you haven't taken chemistry yet, but hopefully you've at least seen the periodic table. And you know that the periodic table includes a lot of information about elements that is helpful, but it's information that had to be discovered first, and then it was combined into a tool and laid out in a way that is visually helpful to us when we study science. And it shows things like the atomic symbol and the atomic mass and the relationship between elements. But all of those things had to be discovered first, and then they were put into this table, which is a super helpful tool if you are doing science. Well, it's a similar thing with the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths can show us things like key signatures. We have already talked about key signatures at length in previous lessons. We know all about them. It will also show us the order of sharps and flats. Again, we've spent a lot of time talking about that. It will show us the key names. We've already learned the hard way or the longer way of figuring out key names, but you actually can just look at the circle of fifths and it will show it to you. So you don't have to go through that whole process that we've talked about in previous lessons, but it was important to me that you knew how to do that just in case you didn't have a circle of fifths in front of you. And it also will show you the relationships. I'm going to run out of room. Relationships between keys. And we won't get into a lot of that today, but if you were to continue studying music theory, you would see that there are a lot of things about the circle of fifths that can help you when you're composing, when you're improvising, and in a lot of other settings. But the first thing you might be asking is, well, what is a fifth? That would be an important thing to know. It's the circle of fifths. It must have something to do with a fifth. And a fifth is an interval in music that is comprised of 7 half steps. So if you start on one note and go up 7 half steps, that's going to be 1/5 above that first note. Let's practice a little bit here. The first question is, what is 1/5 higher than C? So here's the note C. We've done a lot of half step and whole step practice. Let's go up 7 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1/5 higher than C is a G. What is 1/5 higher than A? Now we're going to run out of keys, so we'll have to get creative here. Here's A. 1, 2. I'm going over to the other C for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. E is 1/5 higher than A. D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A. G. 1, 2, 3, 4. Going over to the other C. 5, 6, 7. D. Now, if you play violin, viola, or cello, you probably are noticing a special relationship between all of these intervals. You might notice, and I'll use D for an example, that you all have an open D string, and your next highest string with no fingers is an A. From open string to open string is a fifth. You might also notice that if you play a C with C on the G string, so 3 or 4 fingers, depending on your instrument, if you pop over to the next string and use the same number of fingers, you get the note G. So violins, violas, and cellos are all strung in fifths, which means if you're playing a note, the way to figure out what 1/5 higher is than that note is to play on the neighboring string with the same number of fingers. You can see that here with the next one. E is 1 finger on the D string for all of us. Here's E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. B is 1/5 higher than E, and B is 1 finger on the A string. So from 1 on D to 1 on A is a perfect fifth. Now, bass, I know always sometimes feels left out with these types of things. Bass is strung in fourths, but you can do the same method going down a string. So if you put 1 finger on the D string on a bass and then go down to 1 finger on the next lower string, which is A, you get to a B. So you have to go backwards for bass. It's a little bit harder to think about it in that way. But for violins, violas, and cellos, it's from whatever string you're on and how many fingers you're using to the neighboring string with the same number of fingers. That's 1/5. So that's an easier way of figuring this out if you're a string player. We have a little bit of an advantage there. Let's do one more. F sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going over to the next C. 6, 7. A C sharp is 1/5 higher than F sharp. So now that we know what a fifth is, let's take a look at the circle of fifths. How does it work? Well, the first thing is that key names are organized by fifths. That's why it's called the circle of fifths. So if we check it out here, we have a C, the key of C major. These letter names on the outside are the major keys that we've talked about. So we have the key of C. 1/5 higher than C is G. So the next key signature that's listed on the circle of fifths is G. It's 1/5 higher. A fifth above G is D. A fifth above D is A. So as you go around, you're just going up a fifth. And if you were to do the method of counting 7 half steps like we did a minute ago, you would find that this is correct. They all check out. And then if you go backwards, C to F, to B flat, to E flat, to A flat, these are all going down a fifth or down 7 half steps. As you travel to the right or clockwise, 1 sharp is added to the key signature. So the key of C major has no sharps or flats. Go 1/5 higher to the key of G major, and you have 1 sharp. Now, we've talked about the order of sharps, so you should be able to say, well, I know that that's an F sharp. And we can say for sure that that checks out. We've played in the key of G before, and the key of G has an F sharp. If you go a fifth higher from the key of G to the key of D, we get to 2 sharps, which we know are F sharp and C sharp. And I could keep going around, but you can see we're going up by a fifth, and every key adds an extra sharp. It happens the same way counterclockwise. As you travel to the left, 1 flat is added to the key signature. So starting again with the key of C, no sharps, no flats. 1/5 lower than C is the key of F major. The key of F major has 1 flat, and that flat is B flat. If we go down lower, another fifth below F is B flat. This key signature has 2 flats, B flat and E flat. And again, that checks out as you go around the whole circle of fifths counterclockwise. This also demonstrates for us something called enharmonic keys. That's an N, not an H. Enharmonic. Enharmonic keys are keys that sound the same, but have a different key name and key signature. You'll see as you go around, there are 7 sharps and 7 flats. As you go around clockwise, we add 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, 4 sharps, 5 sharps, 6 sharps. But if I went around counterclockwise and added 1 flat, 2 flat, 3 flats, 4 flats, 5 flats, 6 flats, we land in the same spot. So the key of F sharp major has 6 flats in the key signature. The key of G flat major has 6 flats in the key signature. The letter names are spelled differently. You would construct the scales using that whole half pattern that we learned in our first lesson of this unit, but they would sound the same. If I played an F sharp major scale and then immediately played a G flat major scale, they would sound the same. And so we have a similar thing just in notes. Forget about the key signatures for a minute. Sometimes you'll see in your music a really funky note like a D flat, and I'll say, oh, that's just the same as a C sharp. Play it as a high 2 on the A string if you're a violinist. We have notes that are enharmonic that look different but sound the same and can be played in the same way. You run into the same thing on the circle of fifths. There actually are 3 pairs, so 6 keys that are enharmonic. We have the key of C sharp and D flat, either 7 sharps or 5 flats. We have 6 sharps or six flats, which we just talked about. And then this circle of fifths actually left this off. You also can have the key of C flat, which has 7 flats, or the key of B major. So these are also enharmonic keys. When you're playing, for example, a NISBA solo, and the adjudicator asks you, hey, could you please play for me a B major scale? You can think in your head, if you'd rather think of it as a C flat scale, then just play your finger pattern for C flat. You don't have to have 2 different finger patterns or 2 different methods of playing these. I would plan one way to play each of these pairs, and then know that if they asked you one or the other, you would play it the same way. Hopefully that makes sense. It really only applies to people doing level 5 or 6 NISMA solos, but it is important information to know. This key signature, the circle of fifths also shows you relative minor keys, which are keys that share a key signature. So we didn't really get into this in this unit, and we're not going to this year at least, but on the inside of the circle of fifths, we have minor keys listed, and you'll see that every minor key is related to a major key because they share a key signature. And so the key of A minor has the same key signature as the key of C. And the inside of the circle of fifths works in a very similar way to major scales. It just has to do with minor scales. There is a lot more having to deal with the circle of fifths, but it goes beyond the scope of what we're doing in this class this year. But if you're interested in learning more, I can point you to some other resources to continue learning music theory, because like I said at the beginning, you would be surprised at how much you can benefit from this tool as you are a musician, whether you're composing, improvising, or even just working on scales or your solo music. And so we have finished this unit, and your Show What You Know is to be ready for a special key signature activity in class next week, or it might be this week, depending on when you're watching the video. The day before we go on spring break, I have a super special activity planned for us that I think is going to be a lot of fun, but you need to know your key signatures, and so make sure you are practicing at home. We're going to be practicing in class to make sure we are all excellent key signature readers and key namers in this class. All right? So everyone have a great day. Thanks for watching your Skill Builder, and I'll see you guys in class.